It's bite.
The bite,
Right.
the bite, the bite.
Barking trees don't bite.
Yeah, right.
So, I always try, whenever I give a class, I always try to come up with completely original material. A, because it's more interesting and more challenging, and B, I also kind of find a lot of times, stuff gets recycled and people are polite and they kind of look like they're interested, or read the Jerusalem Post. But on the other hand, people are, I think when people come to classes, they should really be able to find material that they are sort of original and sort of breathtaking. I hope will be breathtaking. So I'm going to do on Tu B'Shvat, we're going to go through 5 different components. I broke it down. So you can peek. I'm teasing. And we broke it down into 5 different segments that we're going to walk through. And I wanted to begin with a very obscure Gemara in Sanhedrin, which on the surface sounds very superficial. But when you understand who's involved in it, you understand that this is actually, they're discussing one of the most primary concepts of creation itself. And it's a Gemara that discusses an encounter between Queen Cleopatra and Rebbe Meir Baal HaNes. And as they're having this conversation, it sounds very superficial, but we're going to actually end the class based on what this real conversation is all about. And then the middle of the class is going to kind of pull from lots of different sources so that, God willing, they'll all come together. So she says like this, the Rebbe Meir, she says, I do believe that there will be a resurrection of the dead. I do believe in the end of days, people will come back from the dead, which is quite extraordinary, because I don't think 98% of the people alive today really believe that, but here she was evolved and elevated enough to have that wisdom. But she adds on, but what I don't know is, will they come back naked, or will they come back dressed? Now first, it kind of seems like a sort of silly kind of question, but what she's asking is so deep, it's tremendous. And of course, Rebbe Meir wouldn't waste his time if there wasn't something really going on in this conversation, and so he responds. And the Gemara says that he says that the people, when they come back from the dead, will come back fully dressed. They will not come back naked. And he proves it, so to speak, in one of the Talmudic logics, which is called the Kal V'Chomer, from something of a less principle to a greater principle. And he says from wheat. He says because wheat, when it's planted in the ground, is planted naked. And when it comes out, it's fully clothed, so to speak. And we'll understand what that means later. So certainly man, who is planted in the ground, so to speak, in a casket when they're buried, who's clothed, would certainly come back out clothed.
Sure.
Right. So it's kind of a, it's sort of a funny thing. What's the analogy? What's it got to do with wheat? What's it got to do with people being buried, going in with their clothes, and so on. But this is what we're going to understand, that what she was talking about here is really tikkun olam. She was getting down to how do we rectify the physical world in its deepest, darkest components. And is it possible? Or is the deepest, darkest reality simply relegated to life in this world, and then once we shed this world, so to speak, it's no longer relevant? That's what she's really asking. And so we have to begin by knowing something which we all know. The Torah tells us this, and it's continued in many analogies throughout Tanakh and as well in Talmudic language, which is that man is compared to a tree. And this idea of man being compared to the tree, there is many opinions as to what was the tree in the Garden of Eden. And according to the Vilna Gaon, it was wheat. The Gemara talks about this as well, that it was actually a tree which was a wheat tree, not like the way wheat grows today, and that it actually gave off its fruit, similar to the way that a regular, let's say, apple tree would give out fruit. And that wheat tree was a tree which was in the Garden of Eden. And he points to this because the word for wheat in Hebrew is chita, which is related to the word sin. Mm-hmm. And wheat, on the other hand, is also related to wisdom. In a very practical application, we know that a mommy, when she has a little baby, a person's not allowed to speak Torah around, let's say, dirty diapers. Okay? However, what's called a dirty diaper? So if a baby is only nursing, that's all the baby is eating is nursing, then the diaper is not called a dirty diaper. If that diaper was there, no matter what the smell is, it wouldn't be considered.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's only nursing, it doesn't smell.
Oh, even better. So as long as that's it, it's not called a dirty diaper. But once the baby consumes wheat, once that's in the child's diet, then at that point, any feces that come out of this child is something that would cause a problem if a person were to pray or to speak Torah within proximity of such a diaper. So there's something very interesting about this idea that on the one hand, wheat is that which becomes the catalyst of wisdom. And on the other hand, somehow or another, it's also associated with this idea of sin. Now, the idea of sin in Judaism is important. I'm going to just lay this down now because I'm sort of laying down layers for when we're going to pull these things together. There are two primary concepts of sin. One of them is the word chet, and the other is the word avera. Chet is from, like Reb Samson Raphael Hirsch says, whose yard site was this last week. It says that it's something which is like to stymie, to deny, to not allow something to become what it could be. It was killed in its potential, it never really actualized. And avera, similar to the word English, over, is something which transgress. It goes too far. So in a way, the concept of sin is about something being T-O-O little or T-O-O much. It's, as opposed to being what it was meant to be, it becomes a distortion of something other than what it was meant to be. And this flip-flop between being what something is meant to be and what something becomes distorted in becoming, this is the tree of knowledge, because it's not the tree of knowledge of bad. I mean, unless you're from New York, then even good is bad. But it's the tree of knowledge of good and bad. It's both the flip and the flop. So it's kind of that the good and the bad are completely mixed up, one and the other. So again, wheat becomes this symbol, which is the symbol of something which has wisdom and yet has sin at the same time, because it's about actualization of potential. That's what evil's all about. Evil creates the void in which holiness can take root. So when she begins to ask this question about the resurrection of the dead, and the resurrection of the dead is this comparison of wheat and the person, we know that one of the things about the tree is that in creation, the tree was the first element to rebel against God. God said that when the tree was to be created, that it should be able to give fruit that has the same taste as, the tree itself should have the exact same taste as the fruit of the tree. And yet it didn't do that. All that happened was that the fruit tasted like the fruit, but the bark of the body of the tree did not taste like the fruit itself. So this was the first, Rashi brings us this, no chiddush, I'm sure anybody, but this is the first rebellion in creation. Now the obvious question is, how could a tree rebel? How could something which doesn't have free will rebel? So the answer is, we learned that the only time, quote unquote, that the trees were punished for rebelling was once Adam and Eve sinned. Then in their sinning retroactively, the trees were punished. And this is because the tree and man are intimately and intricately one and in the same. But since the purpose of creation is man, man's hashpa'ah, his influence, will influence all of creation to be able to reach its potential. But it didn't influence anything else. It wasn't like all of a sudden the air wasn't air or the water wasn't water. It was only the tree that this connection reflected as a result of his free will. And so as a result of his free will going south, going negative, by not opting for fulfillment, the tree remained unfulfilled as well. So again, we see something, A, that the tree is the first source of rebellion. We also see that the rebellion manifests itself in man's downfall. What happens when man has that downfall? He discovers he's naked, and now he needs clothing. So again, immediately we see this connection of the tree and the man, and this idea of wearing of clothing. So in the same way that the bark is the clothing of the tree, and the bark was the part of the tree that rebelled against God, so too the clothing is a result of the rebellion against God. And some of the words which represent clothing are certainly representative of the word rebellion. Beged is from the word boged, which is a rebel. Ma'il, right, it's also like a jacket, is from the word to profane. When somebody performs mi'ilah in the Beit HaMikdash, it's when something which is holy becomes unholy through misuse. So clothing, which is about beged, which is ma'il, these are garments which actually rebel. And if you look at the word beged, you see it's the first four letters of the Torah, of the alphabet, but it's hiding the Aleph. It's Bet Gimel Dalet. Where's the Aleph? Well, it's hidden. And thus the Zohar says when God created the world, he took a talus of light and he wrapped himself in the light. But we know that the talus, in a sense, hid the light. That's the Or HaGanuz. God hid the hidden light in the creation of the world. So all of life in a certain way becomes hide and go seek, looking for a hidden God. We live in a world, as Ishayahu says, the only two things that God created in this world is darkness and evil. Everything else existed before creation. Right? You say it every morning in your tefillah, except we distort the pasuk. We change the word evil to call. Call includes evil. So we say that there's the Or, but the Or is Yotzer. God doesn't create the light, he only forms the light, because the light existed before creation. But the Choshech, Uvorei, he created Choshech. There was no darkness before creation. Shalom, he doesn't create Shalom, he's Aseh, he makes Shalom. Because Shalom already existed, right? That's what Shemayim is. Eish and Mayim is the Shalom of fire and water. So all he had to do is make it so there could be there could be Shalom, peace in this world. And Ra, which is the original verse, Ishayahu, which we call Borei, he creates. So creation is evil, creation is darkness, creation is hiding God, creation is this rebellion of not being able to see God. And yet there's an irony. Because clothing is actually the most revealing. It's the most telltale. You know, if you look at somebody naked, whatever you see, that's what it is. But when you look at somebody with clothing, you see so much deeper into this person, way beyond their physical body. Their choice of clothing, their choice of like muffin boots, right? Whatever it is, when a person chooses their clothing, they are expressing something very deeply. This becomes the irony. The irony is that which hides reveals. And so too as well. Nature, if you will, which hides God, is also a revelation of God. That's why the world was created in two main focus points. We're going to get to them more in a minute, but there's the creation of Nisan, which is the world of miracle, which is where the name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is in its proper order, because that's complete Hiskalut Shekhinah, the revelation of the divine. But there's also what we call New Year, which is Rosh Hashanah, which is Tishrei. Tishrei is the Aleph Bet backwards, but it still gets you to God. Tav Shin Resh, but it gets you to the Yud. So therefore, even in that which hides God can also be the capability of being able to reveal God. So when God creates this world of the darkness, or that which is the evil, that which hides the godliness, we now see a parallel between the bark of the tree, which is the tree's clothing, and it hides God, and the clothing that we wear, which quote unquote hides us, which was also associated with that form of rebellion. Okay, now let's take a look for a minute. We'll come back around the mountain. There are two words which are used throughout the Torah for a tree, because we're now going to take a little bit more of a look at the tree. One is the eitz, and the other is the Elon. What is the difference really between the two? What's the difference between an eitz and the Elon? Anybody want to suggest a thought? Judaism for 20. Okay, well, I'll save us time. So eitz, the Gemara says, eitz la'aso pri. The function of an eitz is to create fruit. But Elon is lehanoah, is for pleasure. And that's why when you look at the blessing that you'll make, Bezrat Hashem, when Nisan comes, you're going to talk about the Ilonot, the beauty in the world. Nothing is lacking from God's beauty in this world. And the beautiful trees which are here to bring beauty and to have pleasure from them, those are the Ilonot, not the eitz. The eitz's function is to create fruit. The Elon is to create beauty. Now watch this. The Eitz Hadas is what the tree is called, the tree from the Garden of Eden, which is also the Eitz HaChaim. We don't call it the Elon Hadas. We call it the Eitz Hadas. Because we know from the Zohar that the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, and the tree of life is actually the exact same tree. The Arizal talks about this. This tree came out of the middle of the Garden of Eden at a central point, and then it broke into two separate branches, or roots, if you will. I forgot the word is called, the trunks. Two separate trunks. One of them being the tree of knowledge, and the other one being the tree of life. Now, those two trunks are the two letters of the word eitz. The first letter is ayin, and the second letter is tzadi. The letter ayin is, first of all, coordinated or associated with the anayim, the eyes. The eyes are always associated with lo tasru achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem. The eyes are all about seeing what you're not really believing. Seeing this world is not seeing truth. Seeing this world is the illusion of everything but truth. That's what gives us our free will. So the anayim are associated with that. Ayin is also 70. These are the 70 nations of the world that occupy this world. But again, it's a tree of life, a tree of knowledge of good and bad. So it's also the Shivim Panim LaTorah. It's also the Shivim Neshamot of Yaakov. It's also got the potential to be good. It's got both in the balance between the good and the bad. The battle, if you will, of this world is the battle of the 70. And on the other hand, the other letter is the tzadi. The tzadi represents the tzaddik. That represents not the anayim of going after one's Yetzer Hara, but rather the tzaddik who fights the Yetzer Hara, who resists. Now we know from an amazing Rashi, I think it's beyond the end of the very first parak in the Gemara on Tainus, Rashi says there that there's something greater than being a tzaddik, and that is called being a yesharei lev, a person who is of a straight heart. Why is a straight heart person greater than a tzaddik? Because a tzaddik, King Solomon says, a tzaddik falls 7 times and he gets up 8 times. Hello, what kind of tzaddik is that? Right? You watch in the papers today, your Rebbe falls once, finished. That's the end of him, right? So here, that he's tzaddik is falling. You just say a person falls 7 times and gets up. Why is he a tzaddik? And then King Solomon goes further. He says, there's no tzaddik in the land who hasn't sinned. What? Say no person in the land. Why is he called a tzaddik? Because unlike the idea of a saint, a tzaddik is a human being who struggles and fails. But that failure, by growing from the very failure becomes a milestone of strength. And that very failure becomes beloved to him or her because that becomes what taught him the fire is hot, don't touch. And that learning lesson, therefore, as many times as he might fall in this world, 7 times, ultimately, if he continues to struggle, he will reach the infinite plane where he'll never fall again, symbolized by the 8th time when he gets up. But the tzaddik, nonetheless, is from the word tzad, kedusha. That every time he has a challenge of his Yetzer Hara pulling him one way or the other, he always tries to push it to the side of holiness. He might not always succeed, but that's the desire of the tzaddik, always wishing to do good, regardless of whether or not he succeeds at the moment. Whereas the yesharei lev has already worked it out. There's no struggle going on. That person is like a magnet just being pulled through time, waiting to go back to God. And that person who's of yesharei lev is of the higher nature. But the nature of the person who's in the state of struggle, who needs the help of God, as we'll see later from the first Tehillim, that tzaddik, that's the number 90. Completion is reaching that level of 100, because that's Kedusha. So the tzaddik can only reach Kedusha by going through the 10 sfirot. And that's what brings him or her to that level of Kedusha, of the completion of the 100. So the struggle then between the Anayim and the tzaddik, this is the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. In contrast, and one more thing about that as well. And this tree produces fruit. Because what are fruit? Mitzvot, Maasim Tovim, Chesed. That's what fruit is. And therefore, every time we are fighting our Yetzer Hara, or doing anything which is an osik and those things which are holy, we are producing our fruit. In fact, I remember once from Mordechai Steinberger from the Old City once said, after a person goes upstairs after 120 years, the first thing they do is they send you to the computer room. And they give you a printout of all your good deeds that you then are supposed to bring to heaven. And they, assemble your Olam Haba for you. And as you're going there, suddenly this little guy, horns, tail, goes, whoop, 1 minute, let me see that paper, please. And it's the devil, so to speak. And the devil looks at this, and the devil pulls out his pen, probably reading, and writes something next to every one of your mitzvot. What does he write? He writes, how many cubic pounds of resistance did he use to stop you from performing that commandment? And it's exactly the reward that the devil gives you that is your heaven. Because some people, let's say, are naturally nice. They can pull their money out of their pocket like that for a person who has their hand out. Okay, it's still a good thing, not to make light, but how about a guy who's a real stingy person, and he pulls out money? Well, they're both pulling out money and they're handing the guy a buck, but for the guy who's really stingy, that's a huge mitzvah. Because the Yetzer Hara is trying really to stop the guy from doing that mitzvah. So therefore, what we see is that the struggle of the Eitz Hadas, of the tree of knowledge of wisdom, how we struggle, that will bear our fruit. That's why the Eitz is created as a tree for wisdom. But now we come to the level of the Ilan. The Ilan is the result of what we've accomplished. The Ilan is the Aleph for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Yud Lamed Nun is the 90, which is the Tzaddik. Now the Tzaddik is living with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, he becomes the Ilan. That is a tree of beauty. That's where you see the fruits. That's where you see the results of all of the work that happened. And that's why the Eitz Hadas is only temporary, whereas the Eitz HaChaim is eternity. Because everything in this world is only temporary. So now the question becomes, if everything is only temporary, how do we understand what is the evil of this world? And then it's going to come back to Cleopatra's question, meaning when she said, will we come back naked or will we come back dressed? She's really asking, all that evil that was in our lives of the earlier world, will it have had any kind of a tikkun? Will there have been any place for our mistakes or all those like really embarrassing things that they show up, on that huge screen after 120 years? So will any, all of us can have that moment, we're all human, but there'll be that moment when all of a sudden, what happened at that next 2 minutes where that scene is building up to, and you're cringing, and Rabbi Akiva's leaning over, and so's Hillel and Yosef, they all want to see, hey, and you're like, swoo, and then all of a sudden the screen goes, it says tshuva, 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 whoop, and then it picks back up when it's already over. So we can edit. That's the beauty of life. As long as a person's alive, you can rewind and edit out everything and anything.
Photoshop too. Photoshop.
Exactly, God shop.
God shop.
So the question is, though, we have to understand what is evil. So we started talking about this before, about this idea of something which is a reality, which is what it is, and something which it isn't, either too little or too much. So obviously the question that the Medrash Rabbah asks, and the Baal Shem Tov explains, is if everything is in the 7 days of creation, where do you see God created evil? Doesn't mention it. So the Bereshit Rabbah answers, on the 6th day it says, Tov Ma'od, very good. And the Medrash says, what is very good? It's the Satan, it's the devil, it's the Yetzer Hara, it's the angel of death. That's kind of funky, right? That kind of makes us like an S&M sort of planet here, like if that's what's very good. And so the Baal Shem Tov comes along and says, no, that's not what the Medrash means. It doesn't mean that those things are very good. It means the word very are those things, but not the word good. The Baal Shem Tov splits the word very from good. Everything God makes is good. Once it becomes very, it becomes not good. Yes, too much or too little. And that is the word ma'od. And the word ma'od is the same letters as Adam. And when God created man on the 6th day as Adam, he created him with a Yetzer Tov, that's the Tselem Elokim, that's created in the image of God. And he also gave us a Yetzer Hara. And that Yetzer Hara is the ma'od. So all of us are a Adam, or a ma'od. When we are Adam, we are in our proper order. And when we scramble our intelligence, we become confused and we forget what our purpose in our life is. That becomes ma'od, which is funny because if you think about the letters ma'od in Hebrew, mem, aleph, daled, it spells the word in English, mad. Right? And so the Gemara says that a person does not sin Ela shenichnas bo ruach shtus. The only time a person sins is when they're mad. So when they're not being Adam, but they're being ma'od, when they're being mad, they go nuts. And that's when a person can sin. And I told this to somebody the other day, and he said, very cute. He says, yes, and what's the path between the two? If you scramble the letters again, you get MDA, Mada. Right? So Mada comes to save the person who's gone mad.
And
but,
Adam.
Oh, for sure. But this idea of Adam and Ma'od, this is that struggle between the two levels of what we are within ourselves. And that's why we have also an interesting thing. The Gemara Brachot that I'm sure everybody's familiar with, it plays with the word. We say in Kriyat Shema, we say that you should serve God with all of your heart, right? With all, well, let's just jump to the chase. Kol u'modecha. The Gemara has two definitions. Everything else has one definition as to what nafshecha, lubavcha is, but has two definitions for what does it mean to serve God with all of your mo'odecha. One of them is your power, your strength, and the other is your character. But I want to say that they're both really the same. If you just bear with me, watch this. What the Gemara is really saying is your ma'od. Serve God with your ma'od. In other words, there's that part of you, or all of us, which is really very pure and pristine. That's our Adam, our pure neshama, our Magen David, our Magen Avraham, our Pintel Yid, the part that can never be ruined, the little pach of shemen of the Kohen Gadol underground. That's the elokus, that's nitzchias, that lasts forever. But when God made us, He caked on us extra, add on. And that add-on, that ma'od, is us. It's our personality. It's who we are. It's our unique path in life that nobody else can replicate. It's that which makes us individuals. You have to take that and serve God with it. You have to be able to go, if you will, the ma'od is the garment of the Adam. And so therefore the highest sanctification is to reach to the lowest level. So when a person can even make their ma'od holy garment, so then they have actually, even in their clothing, the very things which are the natures of the rebellion, the ultimate rectification is they're able to bring that back in the service of God. And that's what happens. And that is why we know that in the end of days, at the time when there will be the resurrection of the dead, that there will be, not only will we come back with our clothing. What did Rebbe Meir mean when he says, just like we're buried with our clothing? He's not talking about tarachim. He's not talking about the talus that they put you in the casket. He's talking about the fruit that you earned in this world while you were producing it from the tree. That's your garment. And when you come into that world, at least you have those merits. When you come out, certainly all of your garments will be holy. Because all of that ma'od will have been rectified. And then the tree's bark will have the same taste as the fruit. Because there will be no more barrier. And what's the ultimate removal of the barrier? What's the ultimate taking away of the illusion? No more death. Resurrection of the dead. There's no such thing as death. Because death represents that which is the ultimate of illusion.